All right, well, it is 12:30 now in Alberta, and we will get started with the Alberta Pork webinar on how to access the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. This is brought to you by the Canadian Agricultural HR Council, and I'm Andrew Harrell, part of the council. Joining me today are two of my colleagues. Our main presenter for this afternoon is Janet Craden. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you.
She'll be bringing us the info, answering your questions, and with us as well is Jade Reeve. She's one of our project managers here at the council, and she's here to provide assistance and support as well as required. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions over the course of this presentation, and we recognize there's an awful lot of detail that we're going to be sharing, do ask those questions. The presentation is actually broken into two components, and so we'll be stopping for a Q&A period between both sections. Questions along the way, I would kindly ask you to just type those into the chat box, part of your control panel on the GoToMeeting side, and just filter your questions in that way, and I'll monitor those and pass those along to Janet. But as I said, it would be great if we could keep the questions to the, we'll answer the questions primarily in the Q&A sessions at the end of both blocks today, and be happy to answer those online. Also, please note that we're recording today's webinar. We're going to make that available to the other members of Alberta Pork who weren't able to join us today, and you guys can listen to that on replay mode as well. So just know that we will be recording all of this information and the interactions for your benefit. And lastly, I have also included a link for your benefit in the chat window. It's a handout that has not only the slides that Janet's going to be taking us through, but a couple of important, I think it's actually three handouts, which she will refer to and are related to our topic today. So you should be able to get that just by clicking on the link in the chat box, and it should pop open a PDF, which you can then save and print and do whatever you like with, but that'll be a resource for you to reference as we go through our materials today. So without further ado, I will pass the microphone over to Janet, let her take it away. And just welcome all, and let's have a great discussion here. So Janet, it's all yours.
Thank you, Andrew. So welcome everyone, and we're really pleased here at CAHRC to offer what is essentially a lunch and learn there in Alberta. And this is for a hugely important, very important topic, accessing the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and following the rules. And it's very important. So next. Because we have a critical shortage that is growing. And basically in primary agriculture alone, we've had a labor gap double in the last 10 years, and we're expecting that to double again in the next 10. And for job vacancies, nationally, the average is around 2.8%, but for agriculture, it is 7%, and for swine, it's very high too at 6%. And meat processing, empty butcher stations, we're at over 1,700 job vacancies across Canada. So this is a growing concern, and we have to find, we need a strong agri workforce in order to get the work done on our farms. So currently we have a new survey. I just want to attract your attention to that. I've included the link right in the slide. We are rerunning the numbers, and I encourage everybody on the call here to participate in that survey, because this is the information that is actually helping Alberta Pork, as well as Canadian Pork Council, communicate the issues to the policymakers, and employers, workers, and ag associations can and should participate. The next slide. Perfect. So for swine, this is from the research we did last time. We have a full arsenal of research to help Alberta Pork and Canadian Pork Council communicate the issues. And that's what we are here at CAHRC. We're a one-stop shop for quality research, as well as HR management solutions, such as this webinar that we are delivering to you today. Next slide. So today we're going to be covering how to access the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. And as Andrew mentioned, it's broken into two sections. One will be more focused on the labor market impact assessment process. And the second part is what to expect when you're inspecting the new compliance integrity regime.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's before Jenna gets into this, maybe we'll test out our go-to-meeting skills, and I'll ask you just to reply very quickly and let us know if you're a new user contemplating the temporary foreign worker program for perhaps the first time, or whether you are a repeat customer of that, and that'll give us a little bit of sense for who's on the line today, and perhaps help us kind of fine-tune our content towards that. So just in the chat box, just respond either directly to me or to the whole audience. It's up to you, your choice. Just let us know, new user or repeat user. That would be great, and that'll be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Right, so to qualify for the temporary foreign worker program, primary agriculture stream, and that is the stream that swine uses, you need to qualify within the definition of primary agriculture in the Immigration Act. You also need, swine is listed on the national commodity list, and you have to use what they call a national occupation classification code for primary agriculture. So yeah, the good news is agriculture stream, that is the stream that hog farms use primarily. Generally, the contracts are for 48 months, so it's usually 2 years. And when you qualify for the primary agriculture stream, the good news about that is you're exempt from the $1,000 fee per worker to do the LMIA, the Labor Market Impact Assessment, and you're also exempt from the temporary foreign worker program cap, and that applies to the meat processors, but it doesn't apply on the hog farms. So these are generally the NOC codes that are in most in demand on hog farms today. There's the general farm worker, but that is in the lower skilled range. That's what they classify it. Generally, a lot of times the hog farms are using the 8252 is what we're finding, and that is as the specialized livestock worker or a swine tech, and that is a higher classification code, the higher skilled agricultural stream. And also farm managers also fall in that area as well. So what is an LMIA? This is the Labor Market Impact Assessment, is what Service Canada uses to assess the impact of hiring a temporary foreign worker on the job market, because absolutely this is a Canada First program, a program of last resort. So they need to assess and that you have a job vacancy. And the process includes forms, paperwork, advertising, housing inspection, and other requirements. Next slide. So the National Commodity List wage rate, this is the wage rate that primary agriculture hog farms would use. This does change, usually annually, but also periodically. And there was just a change this month, so I tracked everyone's attention to that. This is the new wage rates as they're posted on the website currently. And this is really important to be aware of, because when the wage rates change, it can affect your LMIA in progress, and it can also affect a future potential audit. It was the minimum wage change in Alberta that's affected this, but there's been a lot more than that as well. So absolutely always check your wage rates. Go to the main website to do that. And the forms also changed last month as well, I was told. And again, that was done without notification. So it's really important to keep an eye on that and adjust your payroll accordingly in order to stay in compliance with the program. Next slide. So for recruitment and advertising, ongoing recruitment efforts are encouraged within the temporary foreign worker program rules, but it isn't a requirement, but it is encouraged. The rule for primary agriculture is 14 days, and to be done within the 3-month period prior to the LMIA. The primary agriculture does not have to use the job match. This is within the Government of Canada Job Bank, but some Service Canada officers do continue to question that, particularly in Alberta, but in Ottawa, they have said that it's not a requirement at this point in time. Next slide. So these are some tips from a producer. The main thing with your advertisement and the LMI application is to be consistent so that all ads have the same job title, the same job description. You don't have to use your knock code, but they're very particular looking for consistency in these areas right now. The Government of Canada Job Bank and one other source is the rule, and a minimum of 2 weeks. Also, they're very much on the LMIAs, they're looking for the specific location, the wage rate, the benefits and the hours of work. This must all be consistent. And in particular with wages, I'll probably mention this again, but if you're going to pay a bonus to your temporary foreign workers, they're saying that you absolutely need to advertise that. And if it's a production bonus, that you need to say may pay bonus. For location, I've heard of LMIAs being turned down for things like the highway number wasn't included. So very important to be as specific as possible regarding the actual location of the barn and the work. Next slide. So this is an advertising checklist for the LMIA, and they're the kind of things that you need to keep track of, you need to keep for a minimum of 6 years, because that's how far the audits can actually go back. And it's good to keep that in mind. You will need this for the LMIA, and you will need this in the future for potential audits. Next slide. So, and here we have a bit of a checklist with the steps that you will have to go through. And absolutely, the housing inspection report is now required every 8 months. That was a change that was made in the last year. And always to check, again, the Government of Canada's webpage for the latest forms, rules, and wage rates. And I've included the link on this slide. Next slide. So some best management practices for producers on submitting your LMIA to achieve success. Cooperate with the Service Canada officer. Make sure you keep copies. Regarding 2-year contracts, they do require return flights. However, if it's a 2-year contract, it can be one way, but because you'll be buying the return ticket at the end of the contract. And also check off email communications. So for housing, as we mentioned, the housing inspection is part of the LMIA process now. It's required every 8 months. And regarding housing, the employer is allowed to charge the workers $30 a week. And I'm just going to hand this over to Marvin now to speak to the provincial housing and health, occupation, health, and safety, the provincial point. Marvin?
Yeah, it's Marvin Solomons here. Just wanted to add a few points, I guess, for Janet, that in Alberta, we have the rental housing standards in Alberta, and they are governed under Alberta Health. And so we really need to follow some of those guidelines. But on the website for the LMIA, there is a Schedule F that people can download, which is the housing inspection report that can be used for the seasonal and ag stream workers. It's quite a comprehensive inspection. It's about 10 pages long, And the Alberta Health Inspectors, you just have to contact your local Alberta Health Inspector. They may use their own form, or if they don't have that form, they can use the Schedule F that is approved for the LMIA. The housing inspection has to be submitted with the LMIA, which Janet said it's only valid for about 8 months. So sometimes if your LMIA doesn't get approved in time, you have to ask for a second inspection, which can kind of make some inspectors a little bit upset, because we've had that situation saying, oh, we've been out here before, why are we doing this again? It's a free inspection, so it doesn't cost you anything. So just contact your local Alberta Health Inspector. As far as the housing is concerned, I guess I always say, imagine if you're living in another country and you're looking for housing. If this housing is good enough for you, it has to be good enough for you if you want to have it rental housing for your workers. I think you have to look at it that way. I guess the $30 a week is applied from what you can charge from the temporary foreign worker wage. For off-site housing, it can be no more than 30% of the foreign worker's gross monthly earnings. And so the worker doesn't necessarily have to live in that housing, but he has to give notice to you then in that case that he's not doing that, and that has to be in writing preferably. So I don't know if you want me to add anything else on there, Janet, or not.
Well, just regarding health insurance, that it's important in Alberta in particular that you can register them for health insurance even before arrival. So to get all that paperwork done and in place, and workplace safety is all the same rules that apply to Canadians as well.
Yes, the health insurance, they have to be covered, and you can contact any registry agency, or even people like AMA will fill out the forms for you. They will not issue the card for the worker. That'll be mailed in, and you'll get that from Alberta Health. But they need to be covered from day one, as long as they register within 3 months on the date of arrival or the date that you apply, and it goes to the end of the expiry work permit date for workers. So very important when you're looking at doing work permit extensions that you contact Alberta Health to renew that health insurance plan coverage, because if you don't, they're automatically expired based on the work permit expiry date that you gave them. So make sure if you change that work permit expiry or get a new extension, that you get that number in there. As far as the workplace safety that Janet had mentioned, as you know, in Alberta, we've got some new rules. Farm and ranch workers are now covered under workers' compensation, and that goes back to 2016 when they weren't covered, and brought back new regulations brought in as of December 1st. Waged non-family and farm ranch workers will have similar rights to and protections as other workers in Canada. And so we have to follow all those rules as of December 1st, 2018. And so very important that people get up to speed on these rules and get registered for if you've got wage people working on your farm. If there's non-wage people, there's exemptions, but it only covers wage non-family members working on the farm. So something to look out for on that side of things. I noticed that Alberta Labour has provided a grant program through Alberta Agriculture in the last few days here that they are going to cover some of the cost in doing some of this, some of the things that you'll have to do to meet some of the standards, anything from like safety glasses to training programs. They'll cover up to 50% of that cost. I think it's to a maximum of $10,000 over 2 or 3 years. I think it goes till 2021, if I believe, and it comes effective December 1st, 2018. And there's quite a list of things that are covered under that program. And so have a look at that. I think it's $5,000 per year that is allowed. The worker has to be, the farm has to have a registered workers' compensation number and have to have waged employees working on that farm to receive that grant program. So check Alberta Agriculture's website, has a good link on there. Also, Alberta Labor has some information on there as well. So I think it's a good chance to get some funding for some of the things that employers are going to have to do to keep their workers covered.
Thank you so much, Marvin. That was awesome. There's so much to cover, in particular with all these occupation health and safety rules, so that everyone is aware of this. So we'll just go on to the next slide, Mark. So one of the key things to be aware of is we've got some recent information from ESBC on the top 5 reasons why labor market impact assessments are currently being refused. So this gives us a little bit of an inside look at looking at things from the Service Canada perspective, which will help you make sure that your LMIA is successful. So one of the things that they will look at is the top reason is for refusals is insufficient efforts to hire Canadian residents. And now this for farmers, it's only a 2-week advertising requirement, but they're absolutely looking for proof of recruitment, how many candidates have applied, and they want records of the interview and the duration of the recruitment posting. So you could be asked these kind of questions in follow-up. Wage is not consistent with the program requirements. So they require that the temporary foreign workers receive the same wages and benefits as provided to Canadians. Also to refer to the National Commodity List wage rate tables and the new information that was provided, the change that happened this month. And there's things that can trip a person up with this, and that's things like this minimum wage change that just took place. Really important to immediately adjust that in your payroll, but also adjust that in your advertising and LMIA applications and process. And again, really important to say may pay bonus if you plan to pay temporary foreign workers any bonuses. Working conditions not consistent with program requirements. That could be, for example, if you have a swine tech at NOC 8252, but you also need some harvesting done. So that's actually not allowed, and you may be asked those kind of questions in follow-up. Employer not able to demonstrate actively engaged in the business. So that could be related to if you have more than one business number, that could trigger a red flag for the Service Canada officer. And employers not able to demonstrate ability to fulfill the conditions, and this is why the Service Canada officers have part of the LMIA process. They're requiring Revenue Canada documents, financial statements, and balance sheets. And they want to know that you're a legitimate business and you'll be able to pay the workers for the duration of the contract. So that's it for this section. So we're available to ask questions.
Open up for questions.
Open it up for questions.
All right. So if you guys want to go off mute and ask your question online, or you can just type it into the chat box, whatever you prefer. Janet, while we're waiting for that, you had mentioned earlier on in the LMIAs, one of the mandates is to look at underrepresented groups. I think you mentioned was one of the conditions. Can you provide any kind of advice or guidance on how providers can do that, how they can meet that requirement, or any tips that you could give them to try to help fulfill that if they don't have some ideas already?
Yes, and actually that's what we found in our research is that the meat processors have very good best management practices in this area. So we can absolutely provide ideas and tips. And CAHRC, we actually helped with we did a pilot project with the settlement agencies in Calgary with Calgary Catholic Immigration Society. And we had good success there. So it's that kind of thing, engaging with the settlement agencies, and also job fairs, things like this, and we can provide you with examples of how to, if that is a question you're getting, we can help you figure out what would satisfy Service Canada, hopefully.
Great. Thanks, Janet. Anybody online have a question they want to ask before we pass on to the second part of the presentation?
And so I have a question. Has everybody had successful LMIAs? Has anybody had any challenges? Awesome. All positive LMIAs. Wow.
Things are working in Alberta. Excellent. Perfect. Well, if you do think of a question, don't hesitate. You can just pop that in the chat box, and like I said, we'll get to those in due course.
So after the approval of the LMIA, there's a bunch of other steps that take place, and we have a little graphic here that just shows sort of the process of what happens. And what we hear is definitely it's over a 6-month process from the positive LMIA to the approval of the work permit. There's a bunch of steps that need to take place. In particular, there's a brand new process that's been introduced this year for biometrics for the workers. So that includes fingerprints and photographs, and they need to do this at a Canadian visa application center in their home country. So there's been a lot of work, industry engagement with government, because the good news is it only has to be done once every 10 years. But for the amount of volumes of work permits that agriculture uses, it's a bit challenging to do all that this year. So in Mexico, there's been a few concessions, and we'll have the latest and newest information we'll be able to share with Alberta Pork, I think maybe by the end of this week or next week, from what we're hearing with some of the concessions that industry has been able to negotiate with government, in particular for Mexican farm workers. So we'll provide that when it's available, but the main thing is to be aware, that this is going to be a 6-month process or longer, and to plan for that. Next slide. And so the main thing is, upon arrival, to absolutely look at this from your workers' perspective, because they're new to the area, new to the country. They may not speak the language, so they're going to need help with all these things. Help with things like their bank accounts, health cards, driver's license. Transportation to and from work is a requirement of the program, and also shopping for food. And this is really important. Good workplace and living conditions. They're going to help you retain your workforce, both temporary foreign workers and Canadians. And for example, for language training, you may be able to help them find language training in the local center. And some farms are even offering it right on the farm, depending on the size of the farm. And this is also one of the things that the meat processors are offering in the plant. Language classes. And Marvin, do you have any comments on this?
Well, I think as far as the language is concerned, that's a very important point, because a lot of these people come in, don't speak often good English, and you're putting them in a barn in a rural community where they may. I'll give you an example. Maybe you have a Mexican worker in there, and you bring another Mexican worker in, and they both end up speaking Spanish the whole time and never learning English really. And so fitting into the rural community and into Alberta gets even difficult because of that. So I think the language is very important. Providing that translation and language training on site is good, or even off site. Help them with that. It's also important because the AINP requirements for retaining workers, the is increasing. The current Canadian language benchmark is at 4, and I believe in the next year it's moving up to level 5. So they all going to have to have higher English language skills or French language skills, I guess, depending what you want to have them do, in order to qualify for the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program. So it's an important point, and I think that's often doesn't happen in rural areas. As far as I guess new workers, you were on the first points there you talked about. I think I see employers doing grocery runs to town once a week. So it's not just when you're going to town to get groceries, bring them to the grocery store. Don't just drop them off. Often they don't know how to do a lot of things initially, and so it's a good retention tool to get things off to a good start right at the beginning, and that'll help these guys stay, and it's a good retention tool for the farm.
Thank you so much, Marvin. Next slide. So, and that sort of ties into what we're talking about. So, immigration options for farm and food workers. We have the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program, as well as federal express entry. Now, the challenge is that there has been increased criteria, as Marvin just referred to, for the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program, and then some changes also in the express entry that have made it more challenging for farm workers. But this is very much an evolving file, and things are changing on this, and they could change for the better again. So absolutely, Marvin's recommendation was to look into a professional immigration consultant with the Canada Regulatory Council. And I've provided the link that Marvin shared with me. Do you have any final comments on that, Marvin?
Well, I think, like you said, there's the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program came out with one new stream in June of 2018 called the Alberta Opportunity Stream. We used to have an employer-driven stream, and that's been changed to the Alberta Opportunity Stream. New skill levels, more focus on economic need and economic input to the province. So you really have to build a case why that person is important to Alberta and to the economy and to your farm. The language requirements, as you said, are changing. I'm moving up to 5 by, I can't remember the date actually, but it is in the next year. The income thresholds are really going to pose some problems for people. Although, especially if you've got larger families, there's a table on the website that shows, what the income needs are for 1, 2, 3, 4, depending how big your family size is, or that person's family size is. So, for example, a family of 4, which be husband, wife, 2 children, let's say, that income level has to be $43,666 on the table. And that equates to about $20 an hour. And so you got to look at, okay, are they going to meet that income threshold when they do the application? So very important to look at that. The education, again, they're now requiring that it has to be equivalent to Alberta standard and has to be a high school equivalent. So I guess the question is that source country, is that grade 12 in the source country equivalent to grade 12 in Alberta? And that's been some problem on some of the applications. So those are things to look out and some things to watch as you're doing it.
And so Marvin has touched on some of the challenges and the increasing challenges for immigration for farm workers, but industry is working very hard on these issues here in Ottawa and elsewhere. And this is something that our CAHRC research has been supporting. So next slide. So the next section that we're looking at is what to expect when you're inspected. And so at CAHRC, I've done quite a bit of research on this over the summer. One of the things that we found is there's only about 3,300 farm employers using the program from what we had recently reported. We know that there's going to be 2,800 inspections this year. Now, we know that that's for the whole program, but we also know that agriculture and caregivers have been identified as being vulnerable sectors for workers. So we know that a lot of the farms using the temporary foreign worker program could or will be inspected and audited this year. So next slide. So the types of audits and inspection, there's basically administrative, paper-based, which can be over the phone, with the paperwork mailed to the Service Canada officer. Also, there could be an on-site inspection with or without notice. There's random inspections, so you could be just chosen one of 2,800 inspections. There's also risk-based inspections, which are triggered if an employer has had a complaint, or if a past experience they've been found non-compliant and Service Canada is checking up on them. Next slide. So some of the things that we found out, what inspectors are required to do, they're absolutely required to show ID. And so this is a really good idea if they show up for an unannounced inspection, just to ask to confirm that they are with Service Canada. And they all have badges. There are 120 inspectors on the ground, and they all have Service Canada ID, so you can ask for that. And what the inspector can do on your farm, they can ask yourself and your workers questions. They're going to require documents. They will want to make copies of the documents, or they may want to remove the documents to make copies. They can look at your work site as well as your accommodations, take photographs, video, or audio. They will require you to use your computer to examine any relevant documents. And they may bring someone on site, for example, a translator. Next slide. So what can you do? So number one, you can cooperate and have your required documents available, get your paperwork already. Up to 6 years is what they can require. And you can also communicate and ask the inspector to follow your farm's biosecurity protocols. And so this is one of the documents that we're sharing with you. The Canadian Pork Council has done a lot of work putting together what are some the standard, the biosecurity protocols. And so you can use that. You can explain what yours farm, what you do. You might want to do a verbal with the inspector about this, that there's a full shower, that they'll have to change their clothes, they'll have to put on rubber boots and go in and out of the line, wash their vehicle, whatever your protocols are, you can request that the Service Canada officer follow that. Also, if you're very in the middle of stuff for your farm business, you can ask for extension to the audit, because they can take 4 to 6 months, we're hearing. So if it's interfering with your business, you can ask for an extension. And if you disagree with what the inspector is saying, like it absolutely just doesn't make sense, you can actually, there is an official process that's where you can escalate. Request to escalate, and there's a phone number here. And I also encourage you to contact the Alberta Pork, contact Marvin, ask his advice if you have questions about that. Next slide. So again, this is just like what we were talking about with the LMIA. This actually all relates back to they now have 21 conditions with the temporary foreign worker program. The factors that they're monitoring in the LMIA process as well as in the audits, it's all related now. And I have basically cross-referenced it so you can see which condition it relates to. And this is another handout that is available to you, and then you can get more information on what each of these mean. And so for wages, and it's very important because for audit or inspection purposes, if they find you non-compliant, You could be fined a monetary penalty, and I looked online here today, and so that can be between $1,000 to over $8,000. You can be banned from the program, and then they put you on this website. It's a bit of a blacklist. So that's why it's really important to work towards compliance. And once again, for wages, they're going to be looking for discrepancies. So look at it from an auditor's perspective to try and have everything ship-shape regarding the wages. The NOC codes, they can be checking if they're always working in the barn, or did they go drive a tractor for harvest. They can be checking up on those kind of things. And working conditions, the working conditions need to be the same for the foreign workers as Canadians. And they could go into the home where the ag stream workers are living, and they may take out their tape measure and measure that they have enough living space as according to your provincial standards. So that's the kind of thing. They can also be checking if you have enough washrooms, do they have a place to wash their clothes, and also things like, do you have fire alarms installed in the right place according to your provincial code, and are there enough fire alarms? And also, I've even heard that they also check for things like, are there enough burners on the stove? Are the burners working? And even a refrigerator light. I've heard about that. That is has been inspected and part of the inspection process right now. So abuse-free workplace. This one is becoming increasingly important. And the good news is here at CAHRC, we have helped develop a abuse-free workplace policy that is part of our employee handbook that can be customized. And we're going to be talking about that in the AHRC HR Toolkit as one of your resources. And then you can use this as part of your audit process and your LMIAs. You have it available to customize. So the other part, employer cooperation. So if you refuse to allow the inspector on your property, then they can, this is number 5, but it's also that if you don't have 6 years of documents, if they ask for that, as long as you've been using the program. So that's the other part of cooperation that they're focusing on. So next slide. So best management tips, absolutely be proactive. We recommend that. Work towards compliance with the audit and inspection process. And so we have the 21 conditions that we're sharing with you. It's also available on the website. I absolutely recommend, print them off, put them on your barn wall, also put beside your desk, and work towards compliance from the time you do your LMIA to if you get a call or somebody showing up, a Service Canada officer showing up in your yard. And then you'll be successful. Be open. Work with the Service Canada inspectors, be prepared, confirm you have all your documents all in ship shape, ready for the inspection or the audit, and take notes. Make sure to take notes regarding the process and what you've discussed and shared with the Service Canada officer. So next slide. So the one thing that we've done here at CAHRC, we have an article regarding what to expect when you're inspected. It has a lot more details, and we can customize that with Alberta Pork or Canadian Pork Council, which can be shared with your members. And it's hot off the press from ESDC, so it's the latest information about the inspection and audit process. And we would love to help you with that. And I'm going to hand this to Jade to talk to our toolkit offerings.
Great, thank you, Janet. And thanks everyone for staying with us, and hopefully you've enjoyed this session. In terms of some of the offerings in the toolkit, as a member of Alberta Pork, you do have a coupon code that your association can share with you to make sure that you have access to these great tools. And there are a variety of them. As Janet mentioned, there's an abuse-free workplace policy that's a requirement as part of the LMIA process, and that's contained in a handbook that has numerous other HR policies that would be very helpful to distribute to your workers and have as part of your best HR management practices on the farm. In addition to that, Marvin made a good point about some of the retention techniques around, helping your new workers get acquainted with the area and making sure you stay with them through the grocery shopping process and banking and so on and so forth. And so there are some great tips within the section on recruitment and retention that you might want to reflect on as well. So again, the access code is with Alberta Pork, and they can share that with you. And if you have any trouble or need any help getting through it or finding something, don't hesitate to contact us. We're here to help. And we also have within the recruitment section, hiring the temporary foreign worker program section. And with all the latest links to the temporary foreign worker program website for the agricultural stream and the NOC codes and this kind of thing. So that's also within the toolkit. And then next slide. Oh, there you go. We also, if you've got questions, Marvin and Charlotte are a wealth of knowledge. They're here to help you as well. And if you have any specific questions, and I've included the link here for the Alberta Pork webpage regarding hiring foreign workers. And absolutely, CAHRC, we're here as one of your primary resources as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Janet. That's a lot of info, and it's good that we have some speaker notes and some handouts for you guys to follow along. We do have a few more minutes before our time wraps up, so if you have any questions on either the first part of the presentation, which was all about going through the LMIA process, or the second part, which was related to what to expect during the inspections, feel free to ask those now. While we wait for our first question, Jen, I did have one question about the inspection process. Is it the common practice that while the inspector is doing the inspection, you find out what the results are on the spot, or is it typically something that you find out about through a letter afterwards? And is there any kind of appeal or negotiation or explanation process that typically happens with the inspections that we're aware of?
Right, so there's no appeal process at this point in time. The request to escalate is the best option if there's a disagreement about anything major or anything in particular. The inspection process, it seems to be part of an overall audit process. So the whole thing can take 4 to 6 months. That's what we're hearing. There is a letter in the end. There is a letter to say that the inspection is completed, and it's good to cooperate and try and help it move forward, because some farmers I've heard reported that they have had, if they have LMIAs in progress, they're only supposed to be held for issues of worker abuse, but that isn't always how it happens. So if you have an audit or inspection in process, it can hold your LMIA that you have, like it can hold up the LMIA going forward. So that's why it's really good to cooperate as much as possible, but also to know you do have some options. And the options are things like the request to escalate. That's a new process that's developed or being developed, and farmers can ask for that.
Okay, and then typically, is it up to the discretion of the individual inspector to let the employer know throughout the audit as to, or flag anything that's a violation or an issue, or does that happen differently depending on the context and the situation?
Yeah, the inspector will inform the employer, and they are working through issues with employers to achieve final inspection sign-off, but they could also find you non-compliant and remove you from the program. So there is always a risk. That's part of using the program. So the best way to be successful is to be aware of what they're going to be looking for, the 21 conditions, the 5 areas of focus, and then work towards compliance, and then I think you'll get sign off a lot quicker.
Thanks. Are there any other questions from the participants today?
Just another question on the inspections. In your discussions with ESDC and the people in Ottawa, I guess the inspections, are they they're random, I guess, and unannounced in some cases or in a lot of cases, and that's a concern, I guess, in terms of our biosecurity, especially with African swine fever and things like that we have looming on the horizon. But are they always resulting from a complaint, or is it just a random thing that they're just doing? Have you heard how some of those are taking place?
Right. So that was back on slide, I think 22, immediately after the intro, is that they can be random or they can be risk-based. So there's no way of knowing. They're making their own decisions on that based on, I think, an algorithm. But the one thing I can say is the Canadian Pork Council biosecurity protocol that we shared with your handout, that's absolutely, and I think John Ross is on the call as well. I know the Canadian Pork Council has worked very hard having Service Canada include this sort of thing in their training, so they're aware of this issue for pork and the risk of disease. And I know industry continues to work very hard to have that highlighted. For example, there's the service delivery working group that continues to highlight this, that the biosecurity protocols are included in the training. So important for hog farmers. And I know, John, are you on the line? Do you have any comment? I'm not sure if you'll be able to comment but yeah, I know he's on the line. John from the Canadian Pork Council. So they're working very hard on having that included in the training, but it's also good, this is the Canadian Pork Council protocol, you have that now, and that's something that you can bring forward to the Service Canada officer if they show up for an unannounced inspection, and then to request that they follow your farm's protocols.
Great. If there's no other questions, I've got one other one that had come in before that's more on the sort of the introductory level. It relates to the LMI process in general. And Jenna, can you comment on the best practice about whether or not, if you have multiple positions to fill, either say 5 positions that are similar, is it best to handle that in one blanket LMIA for all 5, or does each position need its own LMIA? And is there a difference on which position it is, or if it's in multiple locations, and how that affects the requirements for how many and whether or not you should follow multiple LMIAs to satisfy those needs?
I think it's done both ways. I know for the seasonal farmers, they put through a lot for one farm, but I think it would depend on the NOC code and the location that might affect how you submit. If you have more than one farm location, you may have to do more than one LMIA. And Marvin, do you have any comments on the specifics of that question?
You would have to do specific for each farm is what you would have to do, as far as I understand. Okay,
great, thanks. And John Ross did try to respond to your question, Janet. He couldn't crack the code of his speaker or our mute or whatever, but his word back was they have tried to speak. This is the Canadian Pork Council. They've reached out and they've ensured that Service Canada understands that they use provincial pork organizations as a source of training.
I don't know if you can hear me now.
Oh yeah, excellent, John. Go ahead.
Technology, a wonderful thing. Yeah, we did meet with the ESDC folks, and we walked them through all the importance of the biosecurity and all that good stuff. But probably the most important thing that we left them with was at the provincial level, if they want to get a group of inspectors trained up on this, that the provincial pork organizations were all fully capable of sitting down and providing, a bit of a training session on biosecurity and you know, what the implications of going onto a hog farm are. So between the information that we provided them in a written format and the offer that was made for you know, for their inspection teams to sit down with provincial pork groups, so they didn't have to travel to Ottawa for training, they could get it locally. You know, really no excuse for any sort of silliness on the biosecurity side. I think that if I look at your about your compliance audits, they do on-site inspections with or without notice. What they let us know was that the without notice ones typically are those high risk audits where they are sort of, it's, you know, suspect some sort of malfeasance or some bad actors. Your regular guy that's served on the first round of audits, either picked randomly or however, likely to be notified in advance. So there's also an opportunity in that case for producers to visit a little bit about you know, what sorts of biosecurity that an auditor can expect when he gets to the farm or she gets to the farm.
Great.
And I know I've used the Canadian Pork Council protocol and brought it forward at meetings where we're engaging with Service Canada. So it's continued to be brought forward at almost every meeting that I've been at, actually.
Perfect. That's excellent. Well, we are down at the bottom of the hour, so time is up. Thank you so much, Janet, for that great presentation. Appreciate your ability to answer those questions and field those. And as Jenna mentioned, we've got the slides and a couple of handouts that we will make available. And this webinar has been recorded, so we will send that along, and your friends at Alberta Pork will be able to provide that information for you to review and replay that information in this webinar at your leisure. So thanks again for your participation. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Jade.
Thank
and
you.
we look forward to future presentations to the members of Alberta Pork. Have a great day.
Thank you.